On this week's edition of the Coach's Corner podcast, we kick off season 3 of the show on iHeartRadio and CodyRourke18.com. And also, the show and myself, we're taking on a new journey into writing and covering all things Denver Broncos for Predominantly Orange. I'm very blessed to announce that I have taken on a role as a contributor for Predominantly Orange, which is a news and media outlet site that covers and blogs about all things Denver Broncos 24/7, 365. I'm blessed to join a great crew of guys over at Predominantly Orange. I'm very grateful for the opportunity to break down a lot of different things that is hard to explain over a podcast, over the radio. It's very hard to explain X's and O's and analytical matchups in a sense where more people can learn visually. So I'm very excited to bring that to the table at Predominantly Orange with a great group of guys covering the Denver Broncos 24/7, 365. Head over to predominantlyorange.com and follow us on Twitter at PredomOrange. Very excited. Like I said, I can't state enough how excited I am to join a great group of guys covering the Denver Broncos. Something I've been very passionate about. Something I have to be a little different about. The Predominantly Orange, it's completely all for the Denver Broncos. So I'm allowed to be biased a little bit. Now, when I'm on the radio, I would like to hold a very unbiased perspective, and that's the goal, and that's what you're supposed to do on the radio. Here I get to break down a little bit more about my fandom, my love for the Denver Broncos, and I get to cover and analyze them a lot more. So it's for the fans, by the fans, predominantlyorange.com and at PredomOrange. You can follow us on Facebook as well, Predominantly Orange. Very excited to join a great group of guys, like I said, and be on the lookout for my first article this week. I'm very excited. We're going to talk about why the Denver Broncos aren't rebuilding, but they're simply just renovating. And we're going to cover the difference between the two. I'm very excited to bring that to you, especially on how the Denver Broncos can get back to the Super Bowl next year and years ahead. The formula, the blueprint, the plan. We're going to work it all out on there. But yeah, very excited to announce that as well. Also today we're going to cover the Super Bowl 51, which is exactly a week away, and we're going to cover Matt Ryan versus Tom Brady, the Atlanta Falcons high-scoring offense versus the New England Patriots, also pretty explosive offense that put up a lot of points against the Pittsburgh Steelers and the Falcons, who put up over 40 on the Green Bay Packers last week in NFC and AFC championship games. Now we're at the Super Bowl. Very, very excited about that. We're going to break down that matchup and why I tell you and why I think the over and under for this game is going to be 60. I think it's going to be a high-scoring game, and I feel like it can go down to the last minute, the last 5 minutes. I'm very excited. I'll share my thoughts with you why, but also today I am also joined on the Coach's Corner podcast by one of my fellow Predominantly Orange members and co-workers, contributors, writers, sports radio enthusiasts, Cameron Parker. He joins me here today on the show, so very excited to have him on the Coach's Corner podcast, as well as in the days, the months, the weeks coming forward. You're going to have a lot more of myself and some of my guys over at Predominantly Orange. I'm very excited to have them on the show as well to talk Broncos. More guests this year. More guests this year on season 3 of the Coach's Corner podcast. NFL all over. Coach Les, Nick Ferguson, RJP3, the most controversial Dallas Cowboys cover guy in the United States of America. We're going to have him on here. He's a little more controversial than Skip Bayless, but he's real. And so we're going to have a lot more guests here on the show this season of the Coach's Corner podcast. We are back and better than ever. No more delays, no more life issues coming up that prevent the show from actually fully airing. And that's what hindered me in season 2. Season 2, I just had a lot of family issues come up, a lot of health issues with family that saw me go out of state. So I just got back from Indiana and Chicago. So I do apologize to all you listeners out there who avidly listen and support the show. Why we haven't had a podcast the last couple of weeks is because of that very, very reason. So we're back. We're better than ever. And we're going to get this thing rocking and rolling here today on the Coach's Corner podcast. This is the Coach's Corner podcast, hosted by Cody Rourke. Sports, debates, and the unfiltered truth. Welcome back to the Coach's Corner podcast live on iHeartRadio and CodyRourke18.com. Very excited to be back once again, guys. Like I said in the opening, we're going to have a lot of great guests this season on season 3 of the podcast. If you haven't subscribed to the podcast already, go to CodyRourke18.com, click on the Coach's Corner podcast link on the right side of the page, and it'll have all the links that take you to different sites. If you have an iPhone, it'll take you to iTunes to subscribe. If you don't have an iPhone, it'll take you to iHeartRadio to subscribe. And then if you don't have that, you can go to Spreaker as well for both iPhone, Android, and PC users to subscribe to the show as well. It is live and it's on there. Very excited for what's in store this season, and a big week in store for the NFL. Super Bowl 51 kicking off this week. We're exactly a week away between Matt Ryan versus Tom Brady in Super Bowl 51. Very excited matchup that when I'm looking at, I think it could be one of the highest scoring Super Bowls in history on paper, but that's just on paper. You never know. This might be a game where one team shows up to actually play defense. But yeah, so when I look at the Atlanta Falcons and I look at the New England Patriots matchup, I'm seeing the same discrepancies in the media coverage of it that I saw last year when the Carolina Panthers were facing the Denver Broncos. It doesn't seem like anybody's respecting what Atlanta can do, and I think that's a very foolish move by the media, because as we saw, Aaron Rodgers was on fire at the end of the NFL season and ran the table and lit it up against the New York Giants, and then they got absolutely blasted by the Falcons. And this is my issue here with the media coverage. They're so one-sided because of history. And when we look at history, we look at the New England Patriots. Yes, they have a very rich Super Bowl history with 9 appearances. You cannot take that away from them. Tom Brady is currently 4-3 right now in Super Bowls. Okay, he could either be 4-4 if they lose, or he could be 5-3. Either way, Tom Brady cemented his legacy as possibly, arguably, and I say arguably because you can argue this, one of the greatest quarterbacks of all time. 4 rings already, looking for his 5th. You never know what can happen in the NFL, though. We saw it last year. We saw the media completely say that the Carolina Panthers were going to dismantle the Denver Broncos, demolish them. It's going to be even a worse blowout than it was when Denver lost to Seattle 43-8 in Super Bowl 48. When I look at the media, and this is what I've seen the last 2 weeks since the Super Bowl matchup would be announced, because they get a week, obviously a week of preparation. You got the Pro Bowl. The players that were selected for the teams to go to the Pro Bowl aren't participating in the event, so they have replacements in there anyways. It's an extra week of resting, recovering, hopefully get some guys healthy that may have been injured, get them ready to go for the Super Bowl. And when we look at the media has been covering this matchup, and all they've been talking about is Tom Brady. All they've been talking about is the New England Patriots. All they've been talking about is how Tom Brady's going to demand, and he's going to feel so much gratification when Roger Goodell has to give Tom Brady the Lombardi Trophy at the end of the game. And none of these media analysts are really talking about what the Atlanta Falcons have done this year. And when we look at the Atlanta Falcons, we look at the promising start they had last year. We saw a lot of flashes of what they could be under their first year under Dan Quinn. They started out 5-0, and they ended up losing multiple games straight. And then all of a sudden, they find themselves out of the playoffs last year. This year, they've been on fire on offense. Kyle Shanahan has had an offensive scheme, a game plan each week that really hinders defenses and frustrates them. And it's kind of a matchup nightmare. And the reason, and I'll get to that in just a little bit, but Kyle Shanahan, a current head coaching candidate for the 49ers, has done a lot of great things with the talent that they have down in Atlanta right now. Obviously, last year when we look at the Atlanta Falcons, they had Roddy White, who I think was one of their biggest problems. And the reason I say that is because he constantly was complaining to the media about his role not being utilized. Roddy White got older. He got slower. He wasn't as productive. He couldn't do the kind of things that Dan Quinn and them wanted to do on offense. Matt Ryan was good. You had Julio Jones, who was battling turf toe. He's still been battling that stuff this season, but not to the extent in which he did last year. And Matt Ryan has had a couple of inconsistent years to where I think he's going to win MVP this year. The numbers that Matt Ryan has put up this year at the quarterback position, how efficient that offense has been and how hard it is to stop that offense, Matt Ryan deserves MVP. I'm sorry. And people are going to say, well, Tom Brady could be MVP. Yeah, but Tom Brady missed out on 4 games of the season, and he threw an impressive 28 touchdowns to 2 interception ratio, minus 4 games. That's a great stat for Tom Brady, but I'm talking about Matt Ryan has played every single game this season, and he's put up tremendous numbers, consistent numbers, explosive numbers. He deserves MVP, and I think he's gonna get it because his stats, his production, his turnaround from how he was last season and the year before is miles ahead. I think Kyle Shanahan has done a lot of great for Matt Ryan, and I'm excited to see him in his first Super Bowl. But the media is already counting out the Atlanta Falcons, and I'm going to say they're wrong for this because of this region. When we look at the matchup between the New England Patriots defense and the Atlanta Falcons offense, it doesn't matter who you have out there, honestly. It absolutely really doesn't, because the way that this Atlanta Falcons offense is run, it's systematic to try to force defenses to go man coverage. It's hard to play zone defense against this kind of offense because there's so many different things that this offense does that they exploit and attack those openings and cover. When teams play cover 2, they attack the middle. And the reason they do this is, and I feel like I'm eager to see how Matt Patricia and Bill Belichick really game plan for this offense, because here's what the Atlanta Falcons do on offense. Matt Ryan in shotgun, tailback either to the left or the right of him, and they spread it out. They go twins 800, they go twins on the left side, twins on the right, they go double tight. They'll have 2 tight ends on the same exact side. They'll motion 2 trips, they'll go empty. A lot of it forces defenses to go man coverage, and they'll go twins on the left, twins on the right, tailback, tight end. Okay. And what's going to happen is they run a lot of different level routes. They'll run crossers, deep crossers, to the fact where it'll pull guys in different directions. They'll even run wheel routes out of it. And what we saw the Green Bay Packers do is we saw them fail to adjust to what the offense was doing. And Dom Capers didn't really do a good job. And Dom Capers is rumored to have a very great football defensive IQ, a great mind for making adjustments. We just see him do it once. And here is how the Atlanta Falcons have exploited defenses all season long. And it goes back to when I look at them against the Denver Broncos. Okay. The Denver Broncos lost 23-16. And when we look at it, it was 20-3 at one point. And people were shocked. Like, what's going on? Is the Denver Broncos defense not all that? No, the Atlanta Falcons offense is that good. But when we look at it, Julio Jones had 3 catches against the Denver Broncos for 27 yards. 3 catches, 27 yards. A week after he had 300 yards receiving against the Carolina Panthers, he had 27 yards. And there were no real true receiving threats that really attacked the Denver Broncos. What killed the Denver Broncos in that game was the interior, the defensive tackle position, the inside linebacker position. What Matt Ryan and Kyle Shanahan ended up doing against Wade Phillips and the Denver Broncos defense was they went man coverage. They forced an inside linebacker like Todd Davis or Brandon Marshall to cover a tailback, either lined up in the slot or out of the backfield. And they are fast. And Tevin Coleman and Devontae Freeman both nearly had 100 yards receiving themselves, with Julio Jones only having 27 yards receiving on 3 catches. That blows my mind. And this is the fact. Not many linebackers. I cannot think of many linebackers in this league, maybe besides Luke Kuechly, who can cover a tailback, a shifty tailback like Devontae Freeman or Tevin Coleman out of the backfield. It's very, very hard, especially depending on where they line up. If they do it out of the backfield, you have to deal with crossers. If they line up in the slot, you have to deal with a double move. They're smaller, shiftier guys. You got to be able to get a hand on them. You got to be able to jam them. If that doesn't happen, they're going to catch the ball and go. And so what we've seen, and when I look at it, this is what I saw the Atlanta Falcons do against the Seattle Seahawks in the divisional playoff game. Okay, they went man coverage. They forced Seattle to go man coverage. They went twins on the left side, and they went trips with the tailback being the third wide receiver lined up in the slot. And what happened was they just ran a squirrel route, or a stick route, what we call it. The tailback went a little bit outside. He caught the outside linebacker. He turned his hips, and he caught what we call a deep slant, and he caught it, and he ran. Devontae Freeman ran for about 55 yards before getting tackled. On the next play, they did that later on in the game, and so the linebacker initially adjusted inside a little bit to cover that route, and they ended up hitting the wide receiver on the crossing route, because when you go man coverage and you vacate the inside because the linebacker has to cover, you have nobody underneath. So now it's just a hope that your defense can get to the ball carrier or whoever's got the ball and make a tackle in the open field, which guys like Tevin Coleman, Devontae Freeman, it's very hard to tackle these guys openly in the open field. So they ran all over Seattle with that play. They absolutely demolished the Green Bay Packers with this. So the inside linebackers, Dom Capers' inside linebackers, would adjust inside to take away the tailback coming in. And so they would go with the tailback, and the receivers and the tailbacks' routes would be so clean that they'd pretty much consider them rub routes or crossing routes that really put defenses in man coverage in a bind, which we saw Julio Jones running underneath Fraley, who just caught the ball and he out-sprinted everybody to the end zone. It is hard to stop an offense like this, especially as a defense that plays man coverage. Now, when we look at the New England Patriots, they don't play a lot of man coverage. They haven't played a lot of man coverage since they had Darrelle Revis. Now they play a little bit more cover two. They'll play a little bit of cover two, two-man under, where they'll have cover two up top with the safeties who have a deep half, and they'll play man coverage underneath with the corners and the slots. This, I think, might be the best matchup for the New England Patriots to go two-man under, but you cannot go cover two against Julio Jones, Mohamed Sanu, Matt Ryan, Tevin Coleman, any of these guys, because of the fact that there are so many different holes that are vulnerable in a cover two defense that they won't be able to adjust. All it takes is for Julio Jones to catch a pass within one of the vulnerable zones in the middle, and it's all a matter of tackling him now. Now, if the New England Patriots are gambling and they want to take that chance, and we may as well see that. But I just don't see that happening. And when I look at the New England Patriots and how productive they are offensively, Tom Brady lit it up against the Steelers. Chris Hogan nearly had 200 yards receiving. He had 9 catches, 180 yards, and 2 touchdowns. Chris Hogan is the equalizer because so many different defenses are worried about stopping Julian Edelman, Danny Amendola, Martellus Bennett, used to be Rob Gronkowski. They don't really have to worry about that anymore. And then you got to cover Deion Lewis, Brandon Bolden out of the backfield as well. It's a similar matchup nightmare. And when you combine Tom Brady's experience with the knowledge of what a defense is going to do and being able to audible out of something last second, was something we saw him do quite a bit against the Pittsburgh Steelers. He would audible and call out their defense, and he would exploit it, and he would attack it, and he'd gash it with Chris Hogan. Teams are so focused on covering Amendola, Edelman, Martellus Bennett, and these tailbacks out of the backfield that there's a guy by the name of Chris Hogan that snuck out and ended up tearing up the entire the Steelers secondary. And so now teams are going to start to key a little bit more on Chris Hogan, and that's where a guy like Danny Amendola, Martellus Bennett, or even the tailbacks are going to come in, and they're going to be very productive. They're going to have a high-scoring game. Now, when I look at it, I'm predicting the over-under for this matchup is going to be 60 points, and I think it's going to be the over. I already gave my prediction last week on the Coach Les show. I predicted that the Atlanta Falcons would beat the New England Patriots 34-31 in the Super Bowl, and I think that's a very likely possibility. And when I look at the Atlanta Falcons, I didn't see enough from the Packers offense to give me a good enough example as to how the Atlanta Falcons defense will do against the New England Patriots offense and Tom Brady. I just feel like it's going to be a matchup of whoever can outscore who. But you never know. We could see a defense decide to show up. Atlanta's defense could show up. They've got impressive safeties in Keanu Neal. There's so many different question marks for this game that I really cannot pinpoint a true deciding factor, but I am going to take the Falcons over the Patriots, 34-31. I think Matt Ryan, Julio Jones, Mohamed Sanu, Tevin Coleman, I think Devontae Freeman, I think they're going to have big games. If they can avoid turning over the ball, this is going to be a game where the Atlanta Falcons can jump on the New England Patriots early on. We saw the Denver Broncos defense this year only hold the Patriots to 16 points, and the Broncos defense was on the field quite a bit. That's very, very impressive. Now, while I look at it, I think Vic Beasley is going to be a very important wild card factor for this Atlanta Falcons defense because he's got to be able to get to Tom Brady. And Vic Beasley, as we saw, is a very promising up-and-coming pass rusher. So if he can get to Tom Brady and cause Tom Brady to panic a little bit or to force some of his throws, you're going to set up a lot of scoring opportunities for your defense or chances to take the Patriots out of field goal positions. When the Patriots offense is struggling to score touchdowns, they're very good at scoring field goals because Tom Brady always gets them into field goal range. He gets them in a position to kick points, and so they really never lose many opportunities to score points, even if it is 3 points. This matchup is going to be very exciting. I look forward to seeing how it's going to go. I do anticipate that Matt Ryan and Kyle Shanahan, with obviously an extra week of preparation, can look at this Patriots defense, which during the regular season wasn't that good. Many people are saying it's the number one scoring offense versus the number one scoring defense. But when I look at it, there are many different factors that I factor into this game where I see that the Atlanta Falcons may have a clear advantage. I think the Atlanta Falcons have played a lot more tougher teams this season than the New England Patriots have. I feel like the Patriots have played kind of some of the worst quarterbacks. We saw the Jets, we saw the Dolphins struggle at the quarterback position, and the New England Patriots absolutely took advantage of it. So when you get to play those teams 2 times a year, that's 4 potential wins within the division as well. And then obviously Buffalo. They were an absolute mess this season also. So when I look at that, I feel like the New England Patriots might have had an easier road to the playoffs. I was very disappointed in how the Steelers came and played in the AFC Championship game. Ben Roethlisberger didn't look good. Le'Veon Bell got hurt, but they still couldn't find any rhythm. And the Patriots were clicking on all cylinders. So when I look at this game, I'm telling you guys right now, ignore what the media says. Do your research on the Atlanta Falcons offense and also the Atlanta Falcons defense in comparison to New England's offense. And vice versa. What situations does the New England Patriots defense thrive in the most? And I think it's on 3rd down, 3rd and 10. When they can get in position to put offenses at a 3rd and 10, 3rd and 11, a lot of times they buckle up because they'll go 2-man under. They'll play man coverage underneath with the corners and the slots, and they'll have cover 2 up top with the safeties covering the deep halves. A lot of times they can sit at the sticks, and it's very hard for offenses to convert 3rd downs in a situation like that, backed up so far. So the best bet for the Atlanta Falcons is to spread them out, get them in man coverage, and run your stuff, run your concepts. It's been working all year, no matter what defense you played. The Seattle Seahawks defense is still good, even despite the fact that they didn't have Earl Thomas. They were a dang good defense. The Denver Broncos defense was good against them this year as well, except they exploited the mismatches in the inside linebacker spot. I don't think the New England Patriots have an inside linebacker. I'm sorry, I don't think Rob Ninkovich can cover Devontae Freeman or Tevin Coleman as well out of the backfield. I think it's just too risky right now. So I'm eager to see the matchup and the game plan that Matt Patricia comes up with defensively to go against this very, very talented and explosive Atlanta Falcons offense. And I'm eager to see how the Atlanta Falcons really prepare for Tom Brady and all the weapons that they have. And like I said on the Coach Les show this week, Tom Brady is the system. Everyone wants to talk about the system is why Tom Brady's good. Well, Tom Brady is the system. You take him out of that offense, you know what? They may still be a little productive, but they're not going to be what you have with Tom Brady. They went 11-5 the year that Tom Brady tore his ACL with Matt Castle and still missed the playoffs. Not indicative of the New England Patriots organization, but more so to the competition in the AFC that year. When I look at it, we saw with Tom Brady suspended 4 games this season, the first 4 games, Jacoby Brissett, Jimmy Garoppolo, they played pretty well. They were pretty productive despite Jimmy Garoppolo getting hurt and then Jacoby Brissett getting hurt and being kind of limited in a sense there. When we look at it, Tom Brady is the system that makes the New England Patriots go. And we saw it against the Pittsburgh Steelers. I tell you what, go back and watch the film on All 22. Tom Brady would look at the Pittsburgh Steelers safety. He'd look at their corner. He'd look at the way their Mike linebacker was positioned. He'd automatically call out what coverage they were going into, or if they were disguising what coverage they were truly in, and he exploited it. Tom Brady's a cerebral assassin. And not only do you have Tom Brady being very talented as a football player and with his arm, you have to deal with Tom Brady, the very, very smart quarterback as well, who can beat you with his mind alone. And that's why we talk about him, Peyton Manning, the guys who are smart, the guys who have been audible and check out of something last second and make something work. That's special, and Tom Brady's a very special player. But so is Matt Ryan, and I'm very excited to see how this matchup really pans out. 1 week away from Super Bowl 51, the Atlanta Falcons versus the New England Patriots. Is Tom Brady going to get his 5th ring, or is he going to go 4-4 and have an overall above 500 win percentage in the Super Bowl? I mean, the fact that he can get to the Super Bowl 8 times is an impressive feat in and of itself. I know he's glad he's not playing Eli Manning this year. But the New England Patriots, like I said, as much as I dislike their organization just on the basis of Deflategate, Spygate, and just some questionable credibility stuff. They're a dang good football team. You have to respect them. You have to appreciate the fact that Tom Brady's one of the best football players in the NFL and in the world. As much as I hate to say that, he truly is, and you have to recognize that, especially when you cover the game of football. You have to admire how he plays football. He's very good at it, and I know Tom Brady's on a mission to get that 5th ring and to have Roger Goodell hand him the Lombardi Trophy after all this drama the last couple of years with Deflategate, the suspension, the courts. We've seen Tom Brady play pissed off this year, and it's been scary watching it. He's been on a mission. So, are the Atlanta Falcons up to the test? We shall see this Sunday at the Super Bowl, the Atlanta Falcons versus the New England Patriots. And when we return, my man Cameron Parker joins me here on the Coach's Corner podcast.
This is iHeartRadio.
iHeartRadio.
iHeartRadio makes you want to move.
When you have a great melody, a song can last
Forever. Instantly connected.
I love it when the beat goes boom.
iHeartRadio is the way I get to you.
The biggest songs, the biggest artists,
All in one place.
iHeartRadio.
I'll see you there.
Man, oh man, you're my best friend. I scream it too. There's nothing that, there ain't nothing that I need. Let me come home. Home is wherever I'm with you.
There's no place like home. Get your tickets today at NFL.com.
The 4 of us, we never missed a game. Then life, jobs, kids, new cities. It was time we got back together. A few minutes at NFL Ticket Exchange, and we were set. 4 100% authentic, real deal tickets to the Niners. From one fan to another. There's nothing better than this.
Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to the Coach's Corner podcast. As I said earlier in the show, I am joined by my man Cameron Parker, contributor for Predominantly Orange, as well as a fellow sports broadcaster as well. Calls a lot of high school sports in the Denver Columbine region. Very insightful guy. Enjoyed interacting with him all throughout this year on Twitter during the Broncos season as well. And now I'm grateful to have him here on the show, as well as join him on Predominantly Orange as well as a contributor. So Cameron, welcome to the Coach's Corner podcast, man. How you doing?
I'm doing great, man. It's again, thank you very much for having me. Thank you very much for joining the prestiged website, shall we say, of Predominantly Orange, which focuses entirely on the Denver Broncos. And what better team to talk about in the Colorado area, except for maybe the Colorado Rockies right now, but really, I mean, it's a Broncos town.
Yeah, absolutely. Bronco, and I told the fans earlier, I said, pretty much Predominantly Orange, Broncos 24/7, 365. So, you know what, if any of you listeners out there, which I know a lot of you are Broncos fans, be sure to catch Cameron, as well as a lot of other contributors over at Predominantly Orange, and a lot of great insight that they come up with daily and weekly, with their analysis and takes. And, we're approaching a very pivotal time, I think, for the Denver Broncos and for most sports organizations that aren't currently in the Super Bowl. And I think that's the impending free agency period as well as the draft. As we look back, let's kind of review the Denver Broncos season this year. I kind of want to get your take on what you thought about the Broncos this year. Obviously, the first season away from Peyton Manning, who was a very prolific player for the organization in such a short amount of time that he was with us. He came in and he made an instant impact, and a legendary one, might I add, at that one that Broncos fans will never forget, because Peyton Manning brought a lot to the town of Denver in just his time as a Denver Broncos. So the first year post Peyton Manning, what were your thoughts this year on the Denver Broncos and how their season ended up turning out?
Well, I think initially, when you look at it on paper, 9-7 is not bad when you consider you take away Peyton Manning. Historically, you take Peyton Manning off a roster, that would typically allude to 4 or 5, maybe potential wins on a roster. So you look at what Trevor Siemian did, and with what the defense did, and I understand the sentiment. I mean, I hate to already come out and say that I would think that Paxton is going to be the starter next year, barring any Tony Romo news. But you look at what he did in his first season. I mean, the guy never took a snap before, and then he put up at least relatively, good stats, if you will, in his first NFL season. So I think that for him, I think that he did decent, but he didn't really do decent enough to secure necessarily a starting job next year or this coming season. But when you look at it, 9-7 was still a pretty decent year, and then especially when you counter that with the great defense that they had, the historic defense last year, which was, by my estimation, the best defense in all of the NFL by historic standards. So I think that when you look at what they've had in the past, getting a guy like Trevor Siemian and getting a team to play to that defensive strength and to get it at 9-7 without Peyton Manning is still a pretty darn good achievement. It's not to what Broncos fans and probably myself is accustomed to with what Peyton Manning has had, but it still was at least nice, but it's not something that's going to be going over the top.
Well, absolutely. And when you look back at this season, I think, a lot of people had the expectation, the high hopes that Denver maybe could repeat in the Super Bowl on their defense alone.
I myself was in that conversation.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. When we look at, when we do want to talk about historic defenses, the way that the Denver Broncos defense played last year was unbelievable. We hadn't seen anything like that realistically since the Seattle Seahawks, the year they won the Super Bowl. They were unbelievable that year against us, and it was a 43-8 blowout against the best offense, the best NFL offense in history. That it just goes to show that defense wins championships, and they say that for a reason. We saw it. I mean, earlier in the show I was talking about the discrepancy in media coverage from the fact that this week all I've heard so far from the media is that it's all about the Patriots. I haven't heard many things about the Falcons or what the Falcons have even accomplished this year. It's all about Tom Brady's revenge tour and having Roger Goodell hand him the trophy. Now, and that's exactly what I said. I said that's what the media did last year with the Carolina Panthers. They said the Carolina Panthers were going to dominate the Denver Broncos worse than Seattle dominated the Broncos in Super Bowl 48. And then we came out and we saw from the very beginning, after that first drive that Denver had, they didn't score a touchdown, but it was a very good drive that set up a Brandon McManus field goal, put them up 3-0. We saw the defense come out right away. Von Miller, he made his presence felt and led to a defensive score. And we saw the defense stifle what was the NFL's best offense all year last year in that one game. And Denver ended up winning 24-10. Now, when I look at the matchup between the New England Patriots and the Atlanta Falcons, I look at how the Patriots were during the regular season. Their defense was not among the best in the league. However, the media is coining it as the best NFL scoring offense against the NFL's best scoring defense. I don't necessarily believe that, because when I look at the New England Patriots, they scored a majority of their points on offense, and seldomly they had a few opportunities where they scored defensively for them, and some of them were counted on as special teams. So when you say that the Patriots have the highest scoring defense in the NFL, I think that's trying to undermine and minimize the fact that the Atlanta Falcons have a legitimate offense. One that I also broke down earlier when they played Denver. Denver shut down the wide receivers but struggled against the tailbacks. And that's exactly what this offense is for the Atlanta Falcons. It's a mismatched nightmare. It's a pick your poison. If the wide receivers are being locked up, the tailbacks are usually getting freed up underneath and they're running to daylight. Now, if the tailbacks are struggling out of the backfield catching the ball or getting in space, the wide receivers are having a field day. We looked at the game last week between the Falcons and the Green Bay Packers. The tailbacks didn't really have that kind of impact that we saw them have against the Seattle Seahawks. However, we saw that Julio Jones and the receiving corps for the Falcons, they were on fire. They were having a field day. Julio Jones had 9 catches, $180, and 2 touchdowns. And so when I look back and I looked at some Atlanta Falcons film from this year, I seen the trend. when the tailbacks are not scoring out of the backfield or putting up close to 100 yards receiving, it's the wide receivers that are running off. And that's just how special this offense is. Kyle Shanahan, who was a candidate for the Broncos head coaching job that many fans wanted, including myself, I really wanted Kyle Shanahan because of what he's done in Atlanta, especially with Matt Ryan, who's over the last couple of years has had a very inconsistent career at that point. After having a promising rookie season and his sophomore season, he was very talented, and a lot of people said this guy's going to take this team to the Super Bowl one of these years. Well, now the opportunity's there, and I think it's all because of Kyle Shanahan's offensive philosophy under Dan Quinn, who Dan Quinn pretty much is very defensive minded. He lets Kyle Shanahan run the offense, and they click on all cylinders, and they're the best in the NFL right now for that reason. So, I kind of want to get your prediction. I predicted the over and under for this match to be 60 for this game. And I think, and I predicted earlier this week on SB Nation Radio in Denver that the Atlanta Falcons would beat the Patriots 34-31 in a very high scoring game. I don't see much defense being played in this game, but I do see the game kind of going as who can outscore who and who can avoid the less mistakes. And I feel like turnovers are going to be a big part in this game. Whichever team turns the ball over first, I feel like it may the game may shift in momentum towards the team that capitalized on a turnover, because you can't afford to turn over the ball in a high-scoring matchup between the Falcons, Matt Ryan, Julio Jones, and also Tom Brady, who absolutely shredded the Pittsburgh Steelers last week. It was an unbelievable performance, and you kind of said at the beginning of this conversation in regards to Peyton Manning, when you take Peyton Manning off your team, you're pretty much losing a guaranteed almost 4 to 5 wins that come from Peyton Manning's ability alone. And when we talk about ability with Peyton Manning and Tom Brady, we don't talk about physical ability. Tom Brady's got a good arm, but Tom Brady's best attribute is his mental attributes. He's very smart, and we saw him dice up the Steelers by calling out audibles, and that's something that Peyton Manning did last year in the same Denver Broncos offense this year that struggled so badly to even convert a 3rd and 1. He would audible, and we made it. So a lot of people, I think, failed to realize that Peyton Manning made this offense look better than it actually was last year. And I feel like going forward, obviously with Vance Joseph coming in as a head coach, not a lot of people know about Vance Joseph outside of the fact of the players that have played under him when he was a defensive backs coach and also a defensive coordinator down there in Miami most recently. But I feel like a lot of Broncos country, more in specific, was kind of up in the air and upset when Denver rushed to hire Vance Joseph and didn't want to wait for Kyle Shanahan. What are your thoughts on that? Is it more so that fans feel like Denver rushed it, or are we going to really buy into the model that we're going to trust what John Elway's doing? Because John Elway's been the best executive in football over the last 5 years. His resume speaks for itself, what he's done as an executive and a general manager for the Denver Broncos. He's done a tremendous job. So if he hires a guy like Vance Joseph, there must be a very, very good reason for it. What are your thoughts on the new hire?
First off, I want to talk about the Super Bowl first off, because you mentioned about my prediction. I still see New England winning it somehow, some way, and I know a Broncos fan like myself, people are saying, well, why are you going New England? Well, despite all of the stuff that goes on with New England, they're still one of the better teams in football. And the reason why they're one of the best teams in football is because they have number 12. And I think that when you look at the Patriots, statistically, I guess that some people say that they have the number 1 defense, but their defense is, for the most part, when you look at what they have, all they have is Malcolm Butler and Devin McCourty and Dante Hightower. I mean, those are really their ultimate playmakers if we're really talking about it. And I think that certainly the emergence of their defensive line has taken shape. Like, I myself am a former Cornhusker fan, so seeing Vincent Valentine kind of take into shape and be that guy that I certainly saw the potential down in Nebraska, I think that is definitely a revelating sign if you're a Patriots fan. But at the end of the day, I mean, they're like the ultimate Indianapolis defense that Peyton Manning had. You know what I mean? Like, it was the ultimate bend but not break defense. They give up the big yards type plays, and they eliminate the number 1 playmaker, if you will, on your offense. But here's the issue. The Falcons, and I guess the issue with the Broncos is when they scored all those points is they had multiple playmakers. Well, the difference with this is it's just so creative with running backs and wide receivers from Kyle Shanahan that, fine, you picked your poison. You want to shut down Julio Jones. Well, we the Falcons actually have two legitimate running backs that you want to try and stop. And New England is definitely not the historic defense of Denver, Chicago's, Baltimore, Seattle, you name it. But the fact is, they will try and do whatever they can to try and eliminate it. So maybe their goal is to shut down not Julio, but Matt Ryan down, so you can do a ground and pound game. But to do that, I guarantee you that the Kyle Shanahan of the Gary Kubiak offense, which I'm pretty sure or is almost certain that it's better than the Gary Kubiak offense that we at least had in the Broncos. So I think that it's going to be a good game. I think that the Patriots come out on top, but I think that we may be looking at probably the identical Super Bowl of Super Bowl 49. Where you had the Falcons, let's just go by that because Dan Quinn was the defensive coordinator then, go up by 10, and then the Patriots just somehow worked their way back and ended up winning the game. I don't know. But I think right now, I probably got to go Patriots.
Okay, so are you saying that Matt Ryan's going to throw on the 1 yard line instead of hand it off this game?
Okay, so maybe not quite like that. I'm sure that he'll probably hand it off to his beast mode running back or whoever it might be, Tevin Coleman or Devontae Freeman. But so maybe not exactly like that. I'm sure that Dan Quinn at least learned from that situation.
You got to hope the fact that, he maybe would. But, when I look at it, I kind of touched base on this a little bit earlier on in the show. I kind of touched base on we've seen the potential in Atlanta over the last year. And what I mean by that is last year when they started out 5-0, they looked unstoppable. They looked like a firepower offense. And then guys started getting banged up. Devontae Freeman started getting banged up. Julio Jones was battling a toe issue. And that still kind of lingered with him kind of this year as well. Not as much as it did. But then you had a guy like Roddy White who was constantly complaining and pouting on the field, on the sideline, because he wasn't getting the ball. They got rid of him and they brought in a younger, better guy by the name of Mohamed Sanu, who I think has fit in perfectly with this offense and what Kyle Shanahan wants to do. I liked Mohamed Sanu down there in Cincinnati. I just felt like with Marvin Lewis's system, it wasn't necessarily the best under Hugh Jackson for Mohamed Sanu. That was primarily centered on pretty much AJ Green and Tyler Eifert catching the ball from Randy Dalton. And that was pretty much it. So Mohamed Sanu kind of went as the unsung hero on that team last year. And so now he finally got his opportunity to thrive because, as you mentioned, you're going to have a guy like Julio Jones, who I think is the best wide receiver in all of football right now. And when I say that, I mean he's got the size and the speed. He reminds me of Calvin Johnson, but faster. Not as big, but he's got a similar resemblance to Calvin Johnson. He can go up and he played the ball. I'll never forget the play he had last year on Luke Kuechly where he rose up over Luke Kuechly, caught it, and then ran into the end zone. I mean, it was a freak in nature play, and he's a dang good receiver. So if he gets shut down, I'm going to look for guys by the name of Mohamed Sanu to really thrive, and also Taylor Gabriel as well, a guy who really didn't end up thriving until week 5 or 6 in the season, and he made his mark in the NFL. Now he's a weapon for them as well. They have a ton of weapons, and when I look at it, the matchup, and I don't want to discredit Green Bay in any way, but when we saw what the Green Bay Packers did at the end of the year, run the table to make the playoffs, and Aaron Rodgers went in and he demolished the New York Giants. He went into Dallas and beat the number 1 seeded team. And when I look at how the Atlanta Falcons dismantled that team, and even though Aaron Rodgers didn't make mistakes with the football, they didn't even come close scoring to even make it a game. That tells me a lot I need to know about the Atlanta Falcons and what they can do. And when I look at the Patriots' schedule this year and what they played, they haven't played nearly as tough of a schedule that the Atlanta Falcons have played. And Tom Brady hasn't faced really many great defenses that he's faced in the past. I'd say Denver held them to 16 points, but the problem with that game was Denver couldn't score. Denver offensively could not score, and that was the most frustrating part. So,
and I think for me about the Falcons thing is, you look at so many different offensive weapons, which is, I think, contrary to the offense that the Broncos had in 2013, we had a lot of targets. We had a lot of wide receiver targets, but we didn't. I think the thing that puts the Falcons over the top is the Devontae Freeman, Tevin Coleman dynamic, because Tevin Coleman is what I would say is just the better version of what Theo Riddick should be for the Detroit Lions. I mean, you look at a guy that is explosive in the passing game, and he's a dynamic runner. And I think that and you brought up a good point about Mohamed Sanu, but I would even say that for Mohamed Sanu, both he and Marvin Jones never got really the credit that they had when they were with Cincinnati. And then they start leaving Cincinnati, and you start to see the production that everybody thought was there. And now everybody's thinking, oh, man, these are great wide receivers. What happened while they were in Cincinnati? What's called A.J. Green, and the Andy Dalton show. That was the basic issue. And so I think that for the Falcons, having the two-back system of Tevin Coleman and Devontae Freeman will impact this game, I think, significantly. Not just them running the football. So even though that they want to do a ground-and-pound game, probably is what New England wants them to do, you still need to shut down the passing attack and passing threat that Tevin Coleman brings out of the backfield. And I think that for the Patriots, I think that really I think for defensively, again, I mentioned it with a really good buddy of mine that I had a radio show with down at Metro, and I think the thing that does need to be stated, though, is Green Bay was depleted. I mean, we have to be honest, Green Bay was depleted in their secondary. They didn't have a lot of players there. But at the end of the day, it's a playoff game. It is an NFC championship game. You need to have your best ball that game, that day, in order for you to advance to the Super Bowl, whether it is Aaron Rodgers or not. And I understand, Aaron Rodgers is probably the best quarterback in football. Much debate, like the wide receiver debate, but I think that you look at what Green Bay had, there was nothing there. And so it was understandable why Atlanta went down the throat. But again, to your point, it was how they did it. And then even with their defense, it's how they shut down Aaron Rodgers. They kept him in the pocket. They did the stuff that Denver did to Aaron Rodgers. They kept him inside the pocket. They kept him from making plays or doing the ridiculous back shoulder throws that he has done so well. So I think that Atlanta defensively doesn't necessarily get the credit that it deserves. And I think that you look at players like Keanu Neal, the players that have really stepped up big time for Atlanta. And I think that with Dan Quinn, he's really starting to kind of see Keanu Neal kind of be like that Cam Chancellor, be that enforcer guy in his defense. And I think that there was a lot of makings to be the really good team, and you mentioned it, 5-0 last year. I actually predicted Dan Quinn to be the coach of the year before the season started last year. So when I saw the team go 5-0, I was like, oh wow, man, this is great. I'm actually might have a chance to have a prediction come true. So I think that when you look at Dan Quinn, everything was there. I think that, and now you pair it with a terrific offensive mind in Kyle Shanahan. I myself, too, like you mentioned, did want Kyle Shanahan. But I think that what Kyle Shanahan has done in this system is not just incredible. I would even say historic. He's basically taken what the Falcons have done offensively and probably made it near the Broncos' defense was last year. Not to that extent, but to the point where you may start to see, and I posted the thing on Twitter 2 nights ago or something. I think that's why you're going to start to see a lot of these playmakers that's coming into the draft be taken in the first round. And that's why I think that you may see the running back draft that we've seen in the past, end come in the NFL draft because of what the Atlanta Falcons have done.
Absolutely. I feel like the way that, the Kyle Shanahan has kind of evolved NFL offense this year. When I say that, I don't mean that he's changed the game. I feel like he's taken a little bit of old school, combined it with new school, and made it the new trend. And what I mean by that,
say that's changing the game, though.
Absolutely, in a way, until, and this is the thing. And what I said, what makes his offense so hard, and I said this, I broke down the matchup earlier in the show, was that Atlanta wants to force defenses to go man coverage. They will do so much different stuff, window dressing, that will force defenses to go man coverage. And I said that the New England Patriots this game could not afford to stay in cover 2, because in cover 2 there's so many vulnerable zones that Kyle Shanahan, Matt Ryan, and this offense will pick apart. And we saw that happen against the Green Bay Packers. Green Bay stayed in zone the entire game, and it ended up coming back to bite them in the butt because there was too many different vulnerabilities of what they wanted to do. And what they'll do is they'll go twins on the left and they'll go twins on the right. They'll move the tailback out to the right to make it trips, and then it's one-on-one. It's win your matchup. So if the tailback's not open, you got crossing routes, you got different level routes that can serve as rub routes, and all of a sudden you've got all this confusion. You got all these guys crossing each other's faces on the field, and that's hard for defenses to stop. And that's why we saw Julio Jones come underneath untouched, catch the ball, and then sprint to daylight against the Green Bay Packers. It's a pick your poison matchup, and I feel like if anything, if the Patriots are going to sit in some form of cover 2, they need to be in 2-man under, where they're going to have man-to-man coverage underneath, and they're going to have the 2 safeties playing cover 2, covering the deep halves. I feel like that is the best thing for the New England Patriots to do at this point. Other than that, you have to mix it up. You have to blitz. You have to get pressure on Matt Ryan. If you get pressure on Matt Ryan, you're going to take away a little bit of that big play explosiveness, because the thing about this offense is Matt Ryan knows where the ball is going before the ball is snapped, and that's really hard to stop as a defense. Now, the key for the Atlanta Falcons is to get to Brady, and everyone's like, oh, how do you stop Tom Brady? Well, go back. Let's take a little history lesson. Go back to the AFC Championship game last year. Denver didn't do anything really fancy or flashy. They sent 4 guys. They didn't even try sending 3 guys, because sending 3 guys would be pointless, and they disguised their blitzes. They'd send it to where the outside backer or the nickel cornerback would come off the edge as well, and they drop the defensive end into coverage in the flats. I mean, you don't have to be too fancy with it, but you have to do enough to where you can send guys after Tom Brady. And if you don't send guys after Tom Brady, he's going to make you pay. I didn't really see the Pittsburgh Steelers last week. I didn't see them really send anybody. They did a few. They mainly blitzed 3 guys, which I thought was a terrible idea. And then towards later on in the game, when it was a little too late, then they started sending 4 guys. They started going to a 4-man front and then try to play coverage. They just didn't have the firepower. And opposing defenses, when it comes to the New England Patriots, are so concerned over guys like Edelman, Amendola, Dion Lewis, Brandon Bolden, Martellus Bennett, these big wide receiver types, and tailbacks who can catch the ball out of the backfield, similarly to Tevin Coleman and Devontae Freeman. They failed to account for a guy by the name of Chris Hogan, a guy who not many people would expect to really flourish in this offense with all these weapons. However, you focus your defense on stopping a few weapons. There's going to be one weapon that gets open. So now teams are going to start to look on, okay, how are we going to limit Chris Hogan this week? And that's going to leave the opportunity for guys like Danny Amendola and Julian Edelman to make the plays that they're used to making. And that's the thing with Tom Brady. Tom Brady has the weapons to make this possible, to really outscore this Atlanta team. If that's the fact, Tom Brady's very smart. Obviously, he threw 2 interceptions this year in the regular season, and he ended up throwing 2 against the Houston Texans. I don't know how that happened, especially given how the Texans were. Even though the Texans on paper had the best defense in certain categories, they weren't really great at forcing turnovers all year. And so when we look at it, I looked at one Tom Brady interception. It was a drop pass in wet conditions that AJ Boye ended up catching. So when I look at that, I think this game's going to be exciting. I think it's going to go away from the traditional blowouts. When we look at the Denver Broncos game last week, obviously, 24-10, it's not really a blowout, but it felt like a blowout. But it also had that feeling, especially as a Broncos fan, you're like, this game's too close to be 24-10. Like, even though it was 24-10, it was still too close. I feel like, like you said, I could see this game going how Seattle and New England went in Super Bowl 49. I can see it going that way exactly. I feel like it's going to be very entertaining. And, I'm eager to see if Tom Brady will actually be at 500 .500 win percentage in Super Bowl if he loses. And if he wins, obviously it's going to cement why he may be arguably the best quarterback to ever play the game. So there's different angles for it. I'm just excited for it, man. We're a week away. And I'm also saddened at the same time because now that means that, you know what, we're not going to have football on TV for a while. So now we get...
Unless it's NFL Network.
NFL Network is 24/7. That's the thing that usually gets me through. But then it's also an exciting transition because now we get to focus on the draft, making mock drafts, seeing who's going to go where, projecting on what teams need, and also free agency, where a lot of those question marks that we may have for these teams around the league will be addressed first is through free agency, and then you're going to compile and stockpile through the draft on other significant areas that you may need improving on. So with that said, where do you think, obviously this year, what do you think Denver needs the most this year to possibly get back to being a Super Bowl contender? And when I'm talking offensively and defensively.
Well, I think that's this whole Vance Joseph situation intriguing because I think that at the end of the day, in LA we trust. That's the saying. So I think that ultimately he had chosen to, and I'm not going to slight Dave Tube in the slightest sense because Tyreek Hill blew them up in all those games, so he deserves the right to be at least interviewed for the job. But I think ultimately the top two candidates were Kyle Shanahan and Vance Joseph. And I think when you look at the way that everything went down, look at the way everything's gone down now. San Francisco may end up wanting or end up landing the second best head coaching candidate on the market. So I think that if you're Vance Joseph, and everything that we've been hearing is that he's a great talent evaluator, if you're looking at everything in terms of the head coach openings and everything that's out there, I am circling Denver with a passion, intently, so that I can have a broken pencil at the end, So I think that with Vance Joseph, I think that he's as did Elway. I think they kind of signaled to themselves that Vance Joseph was probably their guy, but I think that they were swayed enough that it could have been 1A, 1B, you know what I mean? So I think that ultimately that's what made Denver so appealing, is because Denver as a head coaching candidate or opening was at the same time because they also have a Super Bowl opening still. Despite everything that's happened with Trevor Siemian and Will Paxton should be the guy, or will we go after Phillip Rivers, will we go after Tony Romo, all those things, that they still have some of the best talent in the NFL on their roster. Demaryius Thomas actually played some of his best ball late to the end of the year, and you look at Emmanuel Sanders, who you could say probably is the number one receiver despite some of the drops of Demaryius Thomas. I still think Demaryius Thomas is the number one, but you're looking at 1A, 1B, and obviously can flip-flop for whatever opinion someone might have. And then you look at, the running backs. C.J. Anderson cannot stay healthy, but he's still, when you look at it, he's still one of the best bowling ball backs that's in the NFL right now. And so, but obviously the future is extremely bright with Devontae Booker. They have a fullback of the future that could be either Howard Griffith and Andy Janovich, biased obviously because he's a Huskers fan, but still. And you look at what he did, the offense clicked when Andy Janovich was healthy. He had the hand issue, he had the ankle issue, and that first game, if that was any indication of what this Broncos team, despite playing Carolina, who, if you want to talk about a nosedive in the National Football League in 2016, but they eliminated so many threats on that defense with just having Andy Janovich as fullback. Having the ability to block Thomas Davis, which is not really hard to do, which is really hard to do when you're facing both those linebackers, which is arguably one of the best linebacker tandems in the NFL. So they have so many weapons offensively, and I'm not even going to go into defensively because that's just that's an understatement. And so if they can just figure something out, whether it's been that QB and obviously the offensive line, which we all know was porous, had more holes than Swiss cheese. So if they can just figure out that offensive line, sign at least people from that right side, and I understand people's gripes about, I think they need to let Okun go and obviously Stevenson will more than likely be gone. So, but if you let Stevenson walk, or not Stevenson, if you let Okung walk, okay, you just basically put yourself in a huge hole on the offensive line, to the point where you have a left tackle gone and a right tackle gone. You have your blind side tackle gone, and you have your right tackle gone.
Yeah. Well, and the thing like that, too, is if you lose your left tackle and your right tackle, your starting guys, I say you let Stevenson walk. I say you do everything you can to keep Okung, because when I look at it, Okung was more promising than anybody else. Outside of Matt Paradise, I think Russell Okung was the second best offensive lineman that this team had, despite the fact that he struggled in spurts. But I think a lot of times this entire offense struggled, because I feel like the Gary Kubiak system this year was outdated compared to what NFL defenses could do now. The personnel.
It did not suit what the players were, at least what they were capable of. And I think that's why you're starting to see them go into this power blocking scheme, which I think, even if they did not sign a guard, I think they will. But even if they didn't, you have a guy like Connor McGovern who didn't even see the field or even the light of day, and they're going to a power blocking scheme, which is going to suit him like a glove, because that's what he had in Missouri. And then you have like a guy like Max Garcia, and we don't know what's going to happen with Matt Paradis and his surgery that's going to happen, but he's flexible enough that when he was playing in Florida, he was able to play the center and play pretty well. So I think that you're going to be looking at both those guys that could be dynamic offensive linemen for the Broncos. And so if they did not sign a guard in free agency, you're looking at potentially Max Garcia as your left guard, and obviously you're going to look at probably Connor McGovern as your right guard with Matt Paradis at center, or depending on what happens with his health situation and whatnot. But I think that, Billy Turner is another guy that obviously gets short-sighted in all of this.
And he actually played a lot in the regular season finale for the Denver Broncos against the Raiders, and I thought he actually played pretty well. And he also got some run against Kansas City late, especially when Schofield was getting blown up and blown back into the quarterback. When I look at the Denver Broncos, and I feel like the main areas of need right now is what they're going to address in free agency. I feel like inside linebacker, they're going to try to bring a guy in who can stop the run, but yet also cover out of the backfield, a Danny Trevathan type guy. And also I feel like they're going to try to bring somebody in at defensive tackle, because that was a spot this year that struggled immensely. And we talk about Malik Jackson. He didn't do good for Jacksonville this year. He was very below average, didn't do well, but he was a great fit for the defense that the Denver Broncos had under Wade Phillips. And we just, the guy that we plugged in, he was great. He did good in spurts, but he wasn't Malik Jackson. He didn't stop the run like Malik Jackson and guys like Terrence Knighton used to do, and Jared Crick. I like Jared Crick a lot, but he's not a guy that you can put in the middle. And also Sylvester Williams was a very, very big disappointment to me this year. I was very disappointed in what we were going to see. But, also things to look at is Denver will be getting Vance Walker back, hopefully, this season if they decide to re-sign him. I think he's going to be a restricted free agent. Also, you got guys like Kayvon Webster, DeMarcus Ware, Brandon McManus, guys who are set to become free agents, restricted or unrestricted, that I feel like those guys you need to bring back. I saw a lot of growth out of Kayvon Webster this year that made me excited. The fact that, I think we should bring him back, because when Aqib Talib went out with his back injury, Kayvon Webster stepped in and played really well and was a very great special team. I felt like he filled the void on special teams that David Bruton used to make for the Denver Broncos. After they lost him, we were looking for a guy who could lead special teams, and Kayvon Webster became that guy. I do believe that Denver offensively, obviously outside of the O-line, I believe that Denver needs to add a third weapon that they can put out at wideout. I don't think Benny Fowler or Jordan Norwood are those guys, unfortunately. As much as I like those guys a lot, Denver needs a solidified weapon. And I know it's a long shot, and I know it's probably hypothetical, but at this point, there have been reports in the media that the Pittsburgh Steelers are getting very tired of Antonio Brown's antics, or the word that I saw was that they're getting thinner on Antonio Brown.
You're not suggesting what I think you're suggesting, are you?
I think I might be, and and the reason I say that is because Emmanuel Sanders also is very good friends with Antonio Brown. So if anything were to happen, I think that could be a very distinct possibility. As much as a long shot as it sounds, Antonio Brown wants to win a Super Bowl. And I don't think that's going to happen in Pittsburgh. Obviously, even we got reports of Ben Roethlisberger pondering retirement. I just don't think right now that Pittsburgh's going to be the best fit for him moving forward. And I do think we could see a change in Antonio Brown's situation. But Denver needs to add another weapon. Another potential guy they could add at wide receiver is Brandon Marshall.
You know what's interesting is we were talking about defensive. I think that they really will address. And I think maybe this is why I think that I trust Connor McGovern at guard, and that's why I think that the Broncos may shock some people in free. I think clearly we may be looking at 2014 again in some fashion of what they did in free agency, of getting a key to lead DeMarcus Ware, T.J. Ward, Amanda Sanders. And I think that when you look at what they might do for the offensive line, obviously a lot of fans have been clamoring for Ronald Leary. Great pick, obviously. But the name Dallas Cowboys offensive lineman, he'll be clamoring for a lot of money because of the fact he played for the best offensive line in football. And then the other guy is about the most surest fit in free agency, and that's Calais Campbell.
Yep, absolutely. Colorado native.
Yep. Went to high school in the Colorado area, understands the area, and not to mention he would fill that Malik Jackson role perfectly. I mean, obviously he would command a little bit of some more money, but he is getting up there in age. So I think that that's something certainly you have to consider. But with him wanting to potentially come home, and I've heard some stuff that says that he wants to return home or play again at Arizona. So, but I think that with Calais Campbell, that's I think that's an intriguing part. But I think the other intriguing part about that defensive line is I can foresee Kyle Pecco taking this defensive line spot next year. And I know that sounds crazy to some people, but again, Kyle Pecco was the most expensive undrafted free agent signing last year. And when you look at what he did in Week 17, I think that's probably the sad part is he never saw the field until Week 17.
Until Week 17, and he did good. He did
really well. I mean, he clogged a lot of lanes. He helped certainly Sylvester Williams in a lot of areas. They were able to kind of help him, work together. And I think that Sylvester Williams, I think he was playing good at times. But again, the writing was on the wall with him once the Broncos decided not to pick up his option. Yeah. So I think that for Kyle Pecco, he really is the intriguing guy, I think, on that defensive line coming next year. And I think that they will address, nose tackle. I think an interesting name, despite the age, could be intriguing, and that's Domata Pecco, who ended up playing with Vance Joseph when he was in Cincinnati. And it's a name that I've floated around, but I think that he could be an intriguing guy. Chris Baker is another guy, and some other guys. But slot receiver is definitely, I think, the other area offensively, and I agree with that too. Is to your point that the slot receiver is the guy that we do need to target.
Yeah, no, absolutely, especially underneath. We saw so many times where teams would try to double team Demaryius Thomas. We saw them successfully do that. He had moments where he wouldn't have a catch until the third quarter. And then we saw moments where Emmanuel Sanders was probably the most consistent wide receiver on our team. And a lot of times, and he took a lot of heat from D-Mac, guys over at 104.3, because he didn't.
By the way.
Yeah, because he didn't want to return punts. Emmanuel Sanders he's been in the league a while now. He's been in the league 5+ years. He used to return punts. Now he shines more in a role now on offense, a wide receiver than in Denver than he ever did in Pittsburgh, which is why he was able to return punts. He's too important for right now for the Denver Broncos to possibly lose to injury, and guys get hurt mostly on returning punts. I think.
Well, I was just going to say, to that point, he's not exactly I think Antonio Brown's a much better player than Emmanuel Sanders because of what he can do on special teams. Emmanuel Sanders is not Antonio Brown. Okay, he doesn't add that dynamic threat to special teams like Antonio Brown does. I think he can, but Emmanuel Sanders understands that he is a focal point of that Broncos offense. You touched on it. And I think that for him, he realizes what he had in Pittsburgh and realized, okay, I can do this times 10 in Denver. And he had a great quarterback with him that could take him to the next level in Emmanuel Sanders, as did what Demaryius Thomas did with Peyton Manning. I mean, Peyton Manning ended up excelling his rate in the NFL times 10, talking about Demaryius Thomas. And so I think that, when you look at what the Broncos could do in terms of getting a slot receiver, that's where, they could add a guy in the free agent market, but I think this is where you kind of have to start looking at the draft about a potential slot receiver, because there's a lot of offensive toys that they could go to try and make that offense better. So they can sign a Danny Woodhead if they want. They can sign a Rex Burkhead, who's another guy, by the way, and I know throwing in my Husker ties there, but he's a guy in Cincinnati, did not get enough playing time because of Jeremy Hill and Giovanni Bernard, but he is a guy that is so underused in that offense, but he is such a terrific talent that he could be potentially a much better, healthier version of Danny Woodhead in the up-tempo offense that McCoy wants to run in Denver.
You know, absolutely. And I think when you make that point, when it comes to Danny Woodhead, I would say I try to avoid signing Danny Woodhead, specifically off the fact he's getting older. He's just coming off ACL surgery, which is always tricky as an athlete. But I looked and I watched Rex Burkhead play last two weeks of the regular season for the Cincinnati Bengals, and more specifically in the final game against the Ravens, in which was Steve Smith's final game ever before retirement. He ran for well over 100 yards and was probably the most impressive player on the field on both sides of the ball between both offenses, between the Ravens and the Bengals. I was very, very blown away by Rex Burkhead. And like you said, he kind of sat in the shadow of Jeremy Hill and Giovanni Bernard. I don't think many people would know who he is if Giovanni Bernard didn't tear his ACL and Jeremy Hill didn't get hurt. But when he got on the field, he proved his point. And, I mean, he's good out of the backfield as well. He lined up last year when A.J. McCarron and the Bengals came to Denver. He lined up in the slot. He beat Talib on an out route. I mean, Talib was the best cover guy in the NFL, as voted by Pro Football Focus. It's hard to get anything on Aqib Talib, and that's the thing. That's the crazy part about it, is he got an out route on it, and Talib was in great position, by the way, on that. He was in phenomenal position. It was just a great throw and a great catch by a good quarterback and a good tailback out of the backfield. But I feel like Rex Burkhead could be a good guy you want to pick up. Devontae Booker in Denver's regular season finale against the Raiders looked like the Devontae Booker we all wanted to see, that we've been missing to see for 16 weeks. So I hope Devontae Booker can carry that momentum, that feeling of what it was like to play like that in that final game, and carry it over into the next season. And then I hope C.J. Anderson can be healthy enough.
Sorry, I don't mean to cut you off. But I think with Devontae Booker, he's another guy that fits like a glove in McCoy's system. And I think that when you look at what he ran in Utah, I mean, that was kind of that up-tempo, power blocking type of skill set. Now, obviously, I think that Booker was such an intriguing player. He could be that, one cut-and-go running back that could fit well in a zone blocking scheme. But he's versatile enough, and I think he may be better suited for the offense that McCoy potentially wants to run here with the Denver Broncos. I think that with what you saw, and you touched on it late in Week 17, I posted a video of it, and there were so many facets of that halfback screen play that went to, like, for 47 yards. That was so incredible. You know, you had Okung pulling all the way to the left and sealing the edge for Booker, and then you had Cody Latimer, who was probably in the doghouse wide receiver the last 3 years. You know, and so I think that when you look at what he did, you know, people argued that he was maybe one of the best blocking wide receivers on the team next to Demaryius Thomas. Mm-hmm. So I think that there's a lot of facets in that play that the Broncos can certainly take to the Mike McCoy offense. And who knows, maybe that was like an audition tape for Mike McCoy and Kyle Shanahan down in Week 17. We don't know. But it certainly looked as if the offense was moving much more fluidly, moving much better, and certainly it was much more successful.
Absolutely. You know, I think the thing was this year that really got to me was after the Denver Broncos won the Super Bowl last year, they became the most talked about team in all sports outside of the Golden State Warriors. And then as soon as the offense started sputtering and Trevor Siemian struggled, the Broncos couldn't do anything on offense. They became the most hated team in the media. And it was very unfortunate to see. But when we look at it, Denver lost a stretch of 4 or 5 straight games in the regular season after being, you know, having a good record, finishing 9-7. Most people want to call that a rebuilding year. I hate the word rebuilding for teams that just went to the Super Bowl. I feel like Denver had a little bit of a reality check, obviously losing Peyton Manning. Now, as my first article will be on Predominantly Orange, I'm going to analyze the difference between rebuilding and renovating, which Denver Broncos are renovating right now, and that's why it's perfectly okay to completely have kind of a little bit of cautious optimism, I'd say, in the Vance Joseph hire, because when I look at it, you bring in a guy, Mike McCoy, whose offense has been pretty talented with the San Diego Chargers at the beginning of the year, and then despite all that, his offense still thrived despite the fact that they pretty much lost an entire offensive line. So they definitely had it worse than we had it in a sense of offensive linemen. I think Mike McCoy can do a lot of good things, especially in the development, obviously with Bill Musgrave as well, with Paxton Lynch, Trevor Siemian, and if they decide to try to pursue a veteran quarterback in either free agency or trade, I really don't see that happening. If they do, it's either going to be Phillip Rivers, or if the Dallas Cowboys cut Tony Romo, I could see them bringing him in. But when I look at it, I mean, even Tony Romo struggled to stay healthy behind the best offensive line in all of football. So that's why I'm a little bit skeptical about it. But I do like, you know, and people, there are many different outlets and blogging sites that completely have no respect for Trevor Siemian. And I think Trevor Siemian did okay for a first-year quarterback, despite the offensive line, despite him getting sacked quite a bit. Trevor Siemian did better than where most people would have been their first year ever playing at quarterback. Outside of, I think, A.J. McCarron, when he stepped in for Andy Dalton, played phenomenal. I was very blown away by A.J. McCarron. He's a guy I actually would like to have on the team. But I'm not going to give up on Trevor Siemian yet. I think Trevor Siemian's got a lot of good intangibles, as I've stated in the past. I do believe it is going to be a quarterback competition. We're going to see Paxton Lynch. I think Paxton Lynch is going to be eager to play and get on the field. So I think they're going to battle it out in training camp. If there is a third guy they bring in, a veteran guy, I think that it just makes competition a little more fierce, which competition can be a great thing in situations like that. So,
well, and I think that I think Paxton Lynch will probably be the starter, at least initially. That's my initial thought, because of the hires of McCoy and Musgrave, and because they want to do an up-tempo offense. You know, I understand that, and I think that's at least my initial thought early on. But again, you know, the thing that needs to be stated is Siemian is a cerebral guy. I mean, he's a cerebral quarterback, and I never once would have said that about Trevor Siemian in college. I mean, Trevor Siemian in college was not the Trevor Siemian that I saw the first 17 weeks of the NFL season. And I think that that's the point to drive home. And that's that when you look at a quarterback in his first NFL snap, okay, I'm not talking about Russell Wilson, because Russell Wilson came in the league and blew everybody off. But I'm saying a quarterback that has never taken a single snap in the NFL, and for him to throw a decent touchdown to interception ratio and produce better stats than Cam Newton, you know, and somewhat of a revelation, and I guess you could say to have Cam Newton struggle, I guess, if you want to say it like that. But that Trevor Siemian play the way that he did in his first NFL season needs to be driven home more than the fact that Trevor Siemian was doing certain things that should not have been done as an NFL quarterback. Bringing him down. You know what I mean? So as a Broncos country, we need to understand that we should be supporting our quarterback. We couldn't pick out his faults, but we need to understand, and we need people to understand that he was our starting quarterback in 2016, and he played pretty well. He would get the ball out quick at certain occasions, but he would also hold the ball on too long. You know what I mean? And certainly, obviously, the offensive line didn't do any justice for him on certain plays. And obviously, when you look at maybe the best offensive play of 2016, at the end of the day, that was all Trevor Siemian. You look at the Kansas City Chiefs game, he basically went all Seneca Wallace, if you know the play that I'm talking about, where he went and scrambled 10, 15 yards from left to right and finally made a play to Jordan Taylor in the end zone. So that was all Trevor Siemian, with an exception of Jordan Taylor of continuing his route. You know what I mean? So he's got certain traits that I think that can bode well for him going forward. It's going to be very interesting to see, though, how the Broncos view him going forward, because I think that there's a slight change in the way that the front office is starting to view it. And I think that the unfortunate thing for Trevor Siemian is the guy that was banging the table for him to be drafted was Greg Knapp, and he's gone. And Gary Kubiak obviously was in his corner. He's gone. And Rick Dennison, he's gone. So the big three targets that were huge supporters for Trevor Siemian are gone. But again, the overarching guy that is still there and was there when he was drafted is a guy by the name of John Elway.
Yep.
And if there's one person who understands quarterbacks more than probably anyone, it's John Elway. So I wouldn't, like you're saying, I wouldn't rule out Trevor Siemian, but the likelihood of him getting the starting job, at least initially, is not good.
Yeah, I think that it's going to be a competition, and that's the thing. When I look at it, we had Tim Tebow in a year that Tim Tebow, who wasn't the best quarterback at all in the NFL, wasn't even top 10 in the NFL, won 8 games, and a lot of them in comeback fashion. I'm talking mile-high magic, something that we've been accustomed to seeing over the last few years. I think, and John Elway didn't want Tim Tebow after that. He didn't.
Wanted Andrew Luck.
He wanted a guy like Andrew Luck. He couldn't get him. So he ended up getting a guy by the name of Peyton Manning. John Elway, if anybody, knows the quarterback position better than most NFL executives right now. I look at the guys like Ben Roethlisberger. I look at the guys like Andrew Luck, and I see that they're stuck on a team that they can be the show, but that's it. They're not going to get any further than that. And that's why I feel bad for guys like Andrew Luck. Andrew Luck's a great quarterback. He just doesn't have a supporting cast around him that I think is going to propel him into winning in the playoffs or even competing for a Super Bowl. They've gotten in the playoffs and they had that great comeback over the Kansas City Chiefs, but then they lost. And then they got demolished by the Patriots in what became Deflategate, essentially. Things like that, I look at it and I think, okay, this is the discrepancy. We got these guys who are great, talented players, but guys who are never going to win it because they don't have a supporting cast around them. And I kind of almost thought that way this year about Aaron Rodgers, who was the bright spot on that team for the Green Bay Packers.
And then he decided to become Aaron Rodgers again.
And then he decided to become Aaron Rodgers once again. And all of a sudden, the NFL, as much as we've seen it, we talk about defense wins championships, that's true, but we have also seen this year how important it is to have a quarterback who can play. And I feel like Trevor Siemian could get better, and I feel like Paxton Lynch can also compete and be good as well. I see a lot of potential in both of those guys. So the thing for me that really bothered me this season was the fact that we had guys within Broncos country that were rooting for a quarterback to fail. I've seen it a lot on Twitter, a lot on social media, and that really peeved me. It kind of reminds me of all this political stuff going on where we have a president of the United States that not many people like, and they want him to fail. It's just kind of, it kind of reminds me of a similar situation that he's the quarterback. He's the guy who's on the team, leading your team, making the throws, going out there and giving it his all, and you want him to fail. It's kind of cynical to root and call yourself a fan when you want someone to fail. So I'm all for it. I'm all for the competition, man. I'm just excited to get this thing going, and I'm really, really excited for Super Bowl 51 this weekend.
I am too. And I think the only difference between, say, the presidency and obviously with Broncos country is, presidency's the presidency, and then you have the NFL, which is still pretty high, but obviously you have the president of the United States, which is running this entire country, and so for people to dismiss that as a total hate thing is a story in and of itself. You know what I mean? But I'm agreeing with you. But I think that, and then that's why I think for the draft, they're kind of transitioning into the draft. That's why for the Broncos, it's going to be nonstop. You're going to see so many different opinions about where the Broncos should go in the draft and where the Broncos should go, and that's, to me, is going to be the identifier on what they do in free agency. I think we have an inkling of where they're going to go in free agency, which is why the best player available ends up coming into play, and that's why, cross the fingers, hope and pray that O.J. Howard is at there at pick number 20.
Yep.
And so I think that, and it's funny, we're saying draft a tight end. That's an interesting position. We mentioned it about the slot position, and I think that tight end is that kind of, again, it's that interesting position to where they have a guy like Jeff Hireman who has incredible talent. You watch some college tape of him down in Ohio State. He was a great blocker with Ohio State, and it just, for some reason, it didn't really translate. But then you go and you see him in the passing game down in Ohio State. He was incredible. And then you look at what he did in the last 3-4 weeks of the season with the Denver Broncos. He's running seam routes like Gronk.
Yep.
I'm not saying he's ever going to be Gronk, but I'm just saying that
there's a ceiling. It's
there. He could be like a Jesse James. He could be like a guy that is an incredible passing threat, or maybe even to make it a mismatch of a guy to create mismatches like a Kyle Shanahan offense, to where you could move him in the slot and have a 6'5" tight end in the slot, or even like if you do get an O.J. Howard, you could create a formation with O.J. Howard on the line and Heiderman out in the slot. That's unreal.
Absolutely.
So, and obviously the guy that's completely gets overshadowed is the guy that's like Owen Daniels, A.J. Derby.
Yep.
And, coming from the New England system. So he understands, despite the drops, and there were significant drops late in the year, I understand.
That fumble against Tennessee was a tough one as well.
But, again, he has this certain knack, this Wes Welkerish knack at tight end to find first downs, to find to find that certain hole in defense to extend the drive. So maybe A.J. Derby is that slot receiver that we're looking at that no one wants to talk about. So, but tight end, again, is that very intriguing position if the Broncos want to go to it, because tight end, and we mentioned it before I came on the show, and obviously through our predominantly Orange Memphis thread, tight end is one of the deepest positions potentially in the NFL draft this year.
You do make a great point. And the thing is, when I look at all the Senior Bowl practice coverage this week, I do see that. I see that the tight end position, the tailback position a little bit is deep this year in the NFL draft, more so than quarterback. And primarily over the last few years, let's say the last 4 or 5 years, the draft has primarily been quarterback driven. It's been, the emphasis is on teams drafting quarterbacks, especially teams like the Cleveland Browns, who will probably draft a quarterback again this year. It just goes to show that, most teams are still trying. Most teams are trying to figure out a way, or even Deshaun Watson, they might draft him. Most teams are still trying to get it right at one position rather than trying to address the different needs that they have as a team. And so when I look at it, I think that O.J. Howard, if he is there at 20, I feel like he will be hard to pass up. But I also would not be surprised if he went a little bit before 20 based on how he's been performing at Senior Bowl practice and the Senior Bowl. He's a great guy. He's got the ability to block. He's that big playmaker type guy who's got explosive playmaking ability. And as a tight end, we still have to see him run at the combine. But he anticipates he's going to run a 4.5 40, a 4.56, 4.58.
If he's doing that, he's a top 10, top 15 pick.
Absolutely. And then a guy, before I let you go, a guy who I think could be on the radar underratedly, who's had a great Senior Bowl week, is Cooper Kupp out of Eastern Washington University, who's been turning heads. He didn't play for a big prolific named university, a Division I that went to a bowl game or anything like that. He played for Eastern Washington University alongside Vernon Adams, who transferred to Oregon his senior year and finished there. He's a guy whose route running is unbelievably crisp. He makes very minimal mistakes. He's crisp with his routes. He's got great hands. He's fast. He's a guy I think could rise up in draft stocks as well. But I don't think Denver would absolutely take him at all, especially at any point. Obviously, Denver's got the 20th pick in the draft. I wouldn't be surprised if John Elway even tried to move up a little bit in the draft. We could see that happen as well.
Or because of the flexibility, because they can now trade compensatory picks this year. I think that's the other part. So could we be looking at a scenario where, let's say O.J. Howard is their guy. Let's just say that O.J. Howard is their guy. And let's just say, for all intents and purposes, Cam Robinson falls. You know what I mean?
Yep.
So I think that you could be seeing a scenario where the Broncos do land to Alabama players, where they move back into the first round and get another guy. But I think that, for that matter, get Christian McCaffrey.
Yep.
So I think that I think that it's a very interesting draft. You mentioned Cooper Kupp. He is undoubtedly on my radar, but I posted him a lot on Twitter. But the guy that is significantly on my radar is Ryan Switzer.
Yep.
Down at North Carolina. And he is absolutely phenomenal. I mean, you think of a guy that is Edelman, Wes Welker to a T. I mean, this guy has it all. I mean, he runs routes as crisp as anything. Same with Cooper Kupp. I mean, in a fashion that is so quick. And then if they don't decide to get a guy like Ryan Switzer, then there's a guy by the name of Trent Taylor down at Louisiana Tech who ran an incredibly sharp route on that 2-point conversion on the practice field down at the Senior Bowl. So I think that the options are certainly limitless, and I would even go as far as to say that the Broncos may have found the kind of guy that they wanted, and it was at the Senior Bowl. Mm-hmm. I mean, if I was to make a bold prediction, I would say that the Broncos found their pick either at 20 or their second-round pick, or maybe even 3 picks for that matter. I don't know. I'm kind of going Michael Irvin bold prediction on that one.
You do mention the fact Broncos have the 20th pick in the draft, and also in the second round they have the 3rd pick in the second round, compensatory of the LA Rams. That right there could be very, very big for the Denver Broncos. They could kill 2 birds with 1 stone, essentially, just by position. I do feel like if Denver takes O.J. Howard and Christian McCaffrey still hasn't been taken, I feel like New England's going to take Christian McCaffrey. That's my biggest fear.
Yeah. I think for me, the only way I don't see them taking him, because you already have Deion Lewis. You put Deion Lewis in your offense, Deion Lewis is probably one of the top offensive weapons in football because of how you utilize him. So either you take Christian McCaffrey because you don't trust Deion Lewis's injury history, or 2, you just really want to draft Christian McCaffrey. So I think that there's other teams I think that could need a Christian McCaffrey. And I think for the Broncos, I put on Twitter, they don't exactly need Christian McCaffrey.
No.
Okay? I mean, but you look at what the Atlanta Falcons did with Tevin Coleman.
Yep.
I mean,
it sure would be nice to have him.
It sure would be really, really nice to have a guy that could be a Danny Woodhead times 50. You know, and especially with what he could add in special teams and all that. And I understand the local ties. I understand everything, but the fact is, the guy's phenomenal. I mean, he was my Heisman pick for the year that he should have won the Heisman. I mean, he single-handedly beat two really good college football teams in a span of a time where the Heisman voting was still going on.
Mm-hmm.
So the fact that they didn't consider the fact that he single-handedly beat USC and he single-handedly beat Iowa, who is probably one of the better defensive teams in the country that not many people understand or even know. He single-handedly beat those teams, getting like 200, 300 yards of all-purpose yards. And I think that I never played football, but I feel like all-purpose yards is probably one of the more underrated stats in football.
Oh, it's absolutely.
Because if you can do anything, if you can do everything for that matter, like Le'Veon Bell,
and that's pretty much the utility man. You know, when we talk about all-purpose yards, we look at Le'Veon Bell. He is the utility man for it. Absolutely, and it certainly would help. And you know, I agree with you. I also voted Christian McCaffrey to be the Heisman winner too. The numbers he put up and the amount of time, like most games, he was out of the game by midway through the third quarter or before the fourth quarter even began, and his numbers were surpassing Barry Sanders. Now, the reason that Derrick Henry won it is because he carried the ball 42 to 45 times a game, which I felt like, you know, he put up big numbers, but he had more carries. When I look at what Christian McCaffrey did, he did it out of the backfield. He did it lined up in the slot. He did it returning punts and kicks. What couldn't this guy do? He even threw touchdowns. What can't this guy do? And so,
so I think that, you know, you look at what his potential could be. Look, I love Le'Veon Bell. I think he's the best running back in football. But you look at what his different style brings, his patience, the way that he just sits there for 5 minutes and lets his offensive line set, and then he honestly hits a hole. Christian McCaffrey is kind of that same guy. If he could be, look, I posted on Twitter, I understand it was pretty lofty, but I mean, you look at a guy like David Johnson with what he could do out of the backfield. You look at a guy like Le'Veon Bell. Those are two sets I can see in Christian McCaffrey.
Yep, absolutely.
And I know that can sound asinine because of a comparison, but that would make him the best back in the league. So I think that he just presents some versatile aspect that I could see Christian McCaffrey because of what Le'Veon Bell did, and I love what he could potentially bring at 20, but we may be looking at a situation where we may want to draft Christian McCaffrey instead of O.J. Howard because of the emergence of what Tevin Coleman did and because of what Le'Veon Bell did as a runner.
Well, and the good thing, too, and as you mentioned, the tight end class is deep, and I'll get to this. I'll make this quick point and let you talk before we get off air here. The tight end class is deep, so if you do miss out on O.J. Howard, if you take Christian McCaffrey, there are several other tight ends out there that could absolutely foot the bill. So when you look at the pros and cons of it, you might be okay. You might be okay if you don't get out a guy like O.J. Howard, but the question is, when you look at Christian McCaffrey, if he's available at 20 and O.J. Howard, who do you pick? And it's a hard decision to make, but I feel like you go with the guy who could do more, and I feel like that is Christian McCaffrey.
I think for me, I would go O.J. Howard because I feel like he's the best can't-miss tight end since Gronkowski. And so I think that when you look at those can't-miss players, you basically have two to pick from. It's like hiring Vance Joseph or hiring Kyle Shanahan. Both will, in my opinion, reap the benefits in the long run. Probably Kyle Shanahan in 5 years, because I think him going to San Francisco is a bad move on his part. But I think that I think that for the Broncos, I think that you look at, well, what do you want? Do you want to go the Kyle Shanahan route of Christian McCaffrey, kind of compare situations of familiarity, or do you want to go the unlikely route of a guy that you don't really have a position of need? I mean, technically you don't have a position of need with both players, but here's a guy where you can go to and get O.J. Howard, who would already be your starting tight end. You can trade Virgil Green, you can cut Virgil Green, or you can get a guy like Evan Ingram, Bucky Hodges, and Gerald Everett, all these guys that could potentially be there for the Denver Broncos. And so I think that for Elway, it's definitely an interesting scenario. You can't go wrong with either one. I mean, that's the point too. You can't go wrong with it. You can't go wrong with either one. So, but I feel like for the Broncos, I will not be upset if we end up. David Njoku. How could I forget that name? He may be the best tight end besides O.J. Howard. So
he's number 2 on my list when it comes to tight ends. I think if O.J. Howard's gone, he's a guy you could definitely pick up that I don't maybe necessarily see going first round.
Well, I was just going to say I could foresee a scenario where, let's just say Njoku does not go in the first round. I could see him being the Broncos pick with a 3rd pick into that 2nd round, because that's how valuable he can be.
Absolutely.
But again, I just think that it's a very interesting situation. For me, if they do not address offensive line in free agency, I still think they will. But if they don't address offensive line free agency, that will be the pick more than likely at 20. It's not sexy, but it's a smart pick. Do you want to do the smart pick, or do you want to do the sexy pick of best player available? I don't know, but it's definitely going to be a fun time, and I will be getting out a couple mock drafts on my own that are predominantly orange. I'm sure you will. So we're going to have it all covered of who the Broncos should be getting at 20, and obviously 8 more picks. So
absolutely, man. So
by the way, I was going to say, speaking of O.J. Howard, did you see the mock draft that I did down at FanSpeak?
I did. I think you shared that a few days ago. I caught a little bit of it when I was on my train ride back.
Not gonna lie.
You know what? Crazy can be good sometimes, because if it worked, guess what? You look like a genius. That's the good side of it. So Cameron, before we get off air, I want to ask you, tell the fans and listeners how they can hear you and follow you on your social media networks.
Well, first off, to tell the listeners about myself, I was a graduate of Metropolitan State University of Denver. I have 2+ years of radio experience, and I'm still searching for that. What can we say? The prolonged radio role of a Darren McKee, Alfred Williams, you name it, those prominent guys like Sandy Clough, trying to search for that gig. Meanwhile, I ended up getting some writing help alongside, because I am a journalism major. So I ended up gravitating to predominantly orange. I heard about them before, and then I ended up looking at the fan-sided, found them, applied the week after the Super Bowl, after when the Broncos shut Cam Newton out. So I ended up getting the gig over at Predominantly Orange. And then midway through the baseball season, because I love baseball first and foremost, so I ended up getting latched onto a pretty significant website, BSN Denver. It's very prominent in the Denver area. So I ended up getting picked up by them, and I am a contributor, writer for the BSN Rockies. And so I'm currently actually doing an interview breakdown of the Rockies' recent signing of Greg Holland, which is a big-time signing. Not to plug some Rockies talk a little bit briefly, but he was a huge signing for the Rockies going forward. So, but that's a little bit about what I can bring to the table, and hopefully come next weekend I can give some more insights and stuff if you want to have me on as a regular or so on and so forth. But I can definitely try and see if I can make it work. Absolutely,
man. I was very grateful to have you here, and definitely very grateful to be joining Predominantly Orange alongside of yourself and many other great guys that in my short time of being in the group thread and joining the team that I've already grown accustomed to be very fond of, and very grateful to be with all of you guys covering the Denver Broncos 24/7, 365, and I definitely look forward to having you guys back.
For people, they do need to understand that Twitter, despite some of the hatred you might see out there, it is still a connection tool. So people need to understand that you have to watch what you say on Twitter and understand that it's okay to connect with people because people are looking for talent. And I can just tell you right now, many times I have had job interviews actually happen because of stuff or people that I've connected with jobs that are on Twitter. And so for you to connect with me on Twitter, ended up butting into a job over at Predominantly Orange. So I'm saying that there's a lot of things there that could bring to the table new talent over at websites, over at certain radios, you name it. So whether it's Facebook, whether it's Twitter, just be careful is all I'm saying.
Absolutely. People fail to realize social media can come back to haunt you. So, I feel like, especially in the sports world, when many people, sports is one of the most debated topics out there. Outside of politics, one of the most debated topics, and sometimes people let their fandom and their own personal feelings get in the way of just a healthy debate, which is something that I've been glad this year is I've been able to get into a lot of healthy debates with fans of other teams, and to be able to agree to disagree respectfully. That's a big part of social media, and so a lot of people don't really realize that. You know what? A lot of your stuff will come back up in search engines and things like that. So always maintain character and always, agree to disagree respectfully. But yeah,
I was just going to say, there's a story. It was a journalism teacher that brought up to me when I was a senior in high school, or not high school, senior in college, and he said that there was a person that was actually, I don't know if he was female or male, but she or he was actually going in for a job interview. And the day before, 3 or 4 hours before the job interview, she put on Facebook or she put on Twitter, "I have to get ready for a job interview that is so stupid." And she was getting ready to walk in to have the job interview, and come to find out, she was denied of that interview the minute she got there. And the reason why is because they were checking social media, found the tweet that said that her interview, that she's about to have an interview, and it's stupid. And sure enough, she didn't get the job. So you just have to be wary at times, and understand, and to a new point, the Twitter world, you're going to have those crazies. You're going to have those people that pose pretty hateful things. I had it happen 2 or 3 days ago. So, it was pretty crazy. But nonetheless, you just got to keep it real. At the same time, you got to keep it real. You have to also be genuine with the fans. And like you said, you got to agree to disagree.
Yep, absolutely. Well, Cameron, I appreciate you joining me here today on the Coach's Corner podcast. I definitely look forward to having you back in the coming episodes as well as some of our other guys over at Predominantly Orange. I'm very excited to open up the panel and got some big things in store.
How many mics do you have, by the way?
I've got several. I've got several. So when we do the setup, if I ever make my way down to Denver for the training camp, we'll have a great setup in store indeed. So that's one thing I'm really looking forward to making a possibility as well. So.
Well, it's interesting that you say that, because like I mentioned, I myself have been trying to search for a radio gig, and I mentioned before you came on, I mentioned to the Predominantly Orange guys, to Sire Bettinger, who you can also follow on Twitter at Sire Bettinger, and Ty Walden, who's our other editor, and Stephen Crease, you can follow him, and obviously Cody, the new guy. Me, you can follow me at Cam Parker 22 for the self-plug of radio. But yeah, I think that for me, I actually, since I don't have anything currently, I was able to go down to training camp for 19 of the 21 days and actually just go down there, kind of get a feel of the action, get a feel of the team, see the growth of the team. So if you ever go down there into training camp, I would love to kind of get the feedback, and who knows, maybe we might be able to do a little Comrex thing. You know what I'm saying?
Absolutely.
Do a little broadcast from the training camp.
Absolutely, man. That's something I definitely have on my wish list to make happen. So, we'll see how things go, man. But like I said again, man, thank you so much for joining me here on the Coach's Corner podcast. It was great having you.
You're very welcome, man.
And I look forward to the future episodes that we do have on here as well.
Absolutely. You keep me posted, and again, it's I'm very blessed to have you on Predominantly Orange. I'm very blessed to have you extend the invite to be on the Coach's Corner and discuss some football, and I can't wait to be on hopefully next week.
Absolutely. Well, everybody, this is Cam Parker joining me here on the Coach's Corner podcast. He'll be back on in future episodes as well. Cameron, it was good having you, my man.
Hey, thank you very much.
All right. Cam Parker from Predominantly Orange on the show, Coach's Corner podcast here today. Thank you for joining me, listeners. Thank you so much for tuning in today. We talk Super Bowl, we talk Broncos, we talk life, we talk matchups, X's and O's. As I said before in the beginning of the show, this season we're going to do a lot more guests, a lot more interviews, a lot more X's and O's matchups, and then you could also catch it on Predominantly Orange when we write as well. So I'm very excited to join Predominantly Orange, a great group of guys who cover the Denver Broncos, a well-prestiged organization. I'm very, very, very excited about that, as I am excited about having a great fan base like all of you that listen each and every week on iHeartRadio. As far as Egypt, we got listeners in Egypt as well. Thank you all. I'm very grateful, very appreciative, and we will see you next week here on the Coach's Corner podcast.